Good evening, late evening, 11:45 p.m. on Saturday, the 15th of October. Gordon Causey, aka on Twitter, Gordy Canuck. If you want to follow me there, it's CANUK. So Gordy is GORDIE, Canuck is CANUK. And talking about masks and whether we're going to have a return to masking mandates. And my suspicion is that they are coming back. Dr. Kieran Moore, who is Ontario's Chief Medical Officer of Health, has been in the press in the past couple of days offering up his view that first they will move to recommendations, then strong recommendations, and then that at some point that masks may be mandated for a prescribed period of time. And anyone who's watched any of my videos before knows that, number one, I'm not really anti-mask. I'm just pro-science. And if you're going to wear a mask, wear the proper type of mask, wear it properly. Otherwise, don't wear a mask. If you're not going to treat it like medical PPE, personal protective equipment, if you're going to handle it like a pair of fuzzy dice that you hang from your rear view mirror, if you're going to pull it out of a dirty germ-filled pocket, if you're going to manhandle it constantly, touching the mask and then touching all manner of common surfaces and just being a germ spreader, well, then leave the thing off your face. If you go to the World Health Organization's website, if you check Dr. Anthony Fauci, Dr. Theresa Tam, they all told us this at the start, that masks are medical PPE, that they must be worn and handled properly. We now know that SARS-CoV-2 is an airborne aerosol, meaning it's less than a micron in size. So if you're going to wear a mask, wear the proper type of mask, not just some flimsy, loose-fitting piece of garbage like this. This is a surgical, sometimes referred to as medical mask, sometimes referred to as a surgical mask. If you check with the CDC, they will tell you these were designed to be worn by doctors in an operating room type setting so that the staff in an OR room, the doctors, the nurses and such, that they wouldn't spit droplets directly into an open gaping wound. You don't want to contaminate someone who has their chest cavity open, for example, and likewise someone being operated on. There's the potential for there to be what is referred to as bodily spray. If you've ever watched a TV show or a movie in which they show you an operating room, you'll sometimes hear them say, "Oh, we've got a bleeder," and blood will start spraying up. And the surgeons, the nurses, the OR staff, anesthesiologists, whoever's in there, they don't want blood spraying into their mouths or other bodily fluids. That's what these are designed for. They're not designed, they were never designed to stop viral pathogens, especially an airborne pathogen like SARS-CoV-2, where the aerosols are less than a micron in size. Everyone knows when you see people wearing these, even if they do that stupid loop thing, where they butterfly it somewhat around their ears. I don't wear these things because they're pointless. So I'm not as adept at them as some, but they, loop them twice around the ear and stuff. But regardless of how they're worn, look at this. See, I'm manhandling the outside of it to get it on right. You have massive gaps here. You have massive gaps up around the nose. Even if you pinch it, there's still huge gaps there. It's useless. We've all seen painters. We've all seen people who work with asbestos or miners or other individuals who have to wear a mask. They wear the proper type of mask. All these do is spread disease because people who wear these things can't keep their hands off of them. And it's an ideal breeding ground, especially cloth, but even these medical crap. They're an ideal breeding ground. It's a petri dish. It's damp, it's warm, and you're breathing on it, and it's going to start collecting germs and bacteria, and they're going to be multiplying. And then you get these idiots wearing it like a chin strap who pull it down to talk to you. I mean, they're ridiculous. And so if they do get mandated again, I will remind anyone to check into the legislation in your jurisdiction to see whether or not there are exemptions. In most jurisdictions, I believe there are exemptions. I know there are in my corner of Ontario, people with asthma, COPD, any number, and even in my area, they include religious objections. And so if you're a Christian, you can perhaps say that as per Genesis, human beings are created in the image of God. And I'm not going to cover up the image of God with a useless piece of cloth or this thing. I have a certain degree of, I can live with someone who wears the proper N95, who has it properly sealed around the face. You can't have a beard. You cannot have a beard and a mask. It renders it useless. Talk to anyone who's done gas hut training, either with police, law enforcement, or the military. And when you go into for gas hut training, can't have a beard. The mask has to be completely sealed. And you're gloved up too when you do CBRN training, which stands for chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, because the donning and doffing procedures for personal protective equipment is incredibly meticulous, incredibly involved. You have to wear gloves. And then when you remove the gloves, you have to make sure that the outside material on the gloves never comes into contact with any actual skin. And what we see all the time, and what I see, what everyone sees, is you go to the grocery store, for example, and you see someone pull one of these germ rags out of their pocket, and then they put it on their face. Halfway through, it's down around their chin. They pull it back up, they pull it down, they wipe their eyes, they wipe their hands, they touch the outside of the mask, and then they proceed to touch all manner of things. They go into the grocery store, they start touching product, and they go, no, I don't want that one. They put it back and put another one out. And this is called cross-contamination. And people should have learned it in grade 7 and 8. But unfortunately, a scared population disengages their higher thought processes, and critical thinking goes out the window, and people grab at a anchor. They're drowning in fear, and someone throws them a rope with an anchor attached to it, and they grab on, and they sink themselves and everyone around them. So the big question is, if they do get mandated, I think how successful any mandates will be will depend largely on compliance. If enough people, if a significant percentage of the population has not shut down their brain, has not lost the capacity for rational thought, and is willing to be forthright enough to say, no, I'm exempt. And it's a law in countries like Canada, in jurisdictions such as Canadian provinces, and I'm sure it's the same in many American states and in other Western countries. You're not required to divulge your personal medical information. So I'm exempt should be enough. I know we've all seen the videos, we've all heard the stories about individuals who have asserted their right not to wear a mask, who have been the COVID Karens and the COVID Carls who are scared to death of getting a virus, a bacteria, a germ. We've got people deathly afraid of their hands, deathly afraid of the air they breathe. And so they'll grab onto any stupid thing they can find to alleviate that fear. And sadly, it's, this, as I say, if people were wearing proper N95, properly sealed tightly against the face, and they were handling it properly, employing the proper donning and doffing procedures, that's one thing. But the simple fact of the matter is that nobody, next to nobody, is going to employ these donning and doffing procedures and proper handling techniques simply because they're far too involved. They are, and you just want to go into the gas station or go into the shopping mall or the drugstore or the grocery store, whatever the case. You do want to be sanitizing, making sure to only handle it by the loops, make sure, and then if you do touch the outside, then you immediately have to sanitize again. And hand sanitizer, everyone knows it removes that top layer. Your skin is the largest organ on your body, and it actually removes a layer of it. And a lot of people complain that hand sanitizer exacerbates things like eczema, and I forget the other, psoriasis, and it causes all kinds of skin problems and irritation. I don't use this stuff. It's absolutely 100% gross. But the simple fact of the matter is, no matter what we do, whether people wear masks or not, I mean, it doesn't matter. This is viral season. This is infectious season. In the Northern Hemisphere, as we get into we're well into October now, halfway through November, December, on through to March, April. This is when viruses spread, and there are a number of reasons why. Number one, we're indoors more often, and there's less sunlight regardless. The hours of sunlight are going down, 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 and they'll keep decreasing until the winter solstice around December 21st. Every day is going to have less and less sunlight. Less sunlight means less vitamin D. Less vitamin D means a weaker immune system. Vitamin D is essential to a healthy, robust immune system. It's one factor. So we have less vitamin D because of the decreased amount of sun that we're getting. So that's one reason viruses spread now. There are other reasons that are postulated by medical professionals. Because the air is colder, it's believed that our blood vessels contract, and that restricts the delivery of disease-fighting white blood cells. So that's the second reason. Another reason being, with the air being so dry, a lot of people, if you're prone to nosebleeds, the winter is a bad time because our nasal passages dry out, and it can lead to increased nosebleeds. And that mucus, when your nasal passages and such dry out, that mucus that's there under normal conditions actually serves as something of a barrier. It's theorized, and that keeps pathogens like viruses like SARS-CoV-2 from getting in. So that's a defense that's down. And likewise, finally, in the cold weather, the atmosphere, the air is less humid. Humidity in the air, that's moisture in the air. And when the air is dry, there's less moisture in the air, and viral aerosols will linger for much longer periods of time. The articles I've read have said that viral aerosols in the proper humidity conditions, meaning very low humidity, very dry air, and everyone complains, oh, my skin gets so itchy because the air is dry. Well, when the air is dry, that allows viral aerosols to linger in the air for hours, and I've even read that it can be days. So if you go into a grocery store or similar type setting, hockey arena, school, classroom, whatever the case, and if there are dozens, 100, 200, 300 people milling about, well, the simple fact of the matter is that we are all swimming in viral aerosols, or in aerosols of any description, whether they have a virus or not. And this is why always in October to March, April, This is why we called it flu season. This is why incidences of flu spiked high during so-called flu season. Everyone in Ontario knows that our hospital system regularly, before COVID came along, would get inundated with patients during this time of year, and that hospitals being over capacity was 100% absolutely the norm. You can read articles on it from 2017, 18, 19, before COVID showed up, about hospitals being war zones, about patients being piled into hallways, into conference rooms, patients being treated in the waiting room in chairs because there's nowhere else to put anyone. And that was de rigueur, that was normal, that was standard operating procedure, because our hospital systems have not, our healthcare, broader healthcare sector, for decades, the investments weren't needed, the expansion was not made. We were warned for 20, 30 years that once baby boomers, people born after the Second World War, the post-war baby boom, born between 1946 and 1961, 1962, somewhere around there, that this huge pig in the python is the term that's often used, this huge glob in the population, as they got into, we were told when they got into their 60s and 70s, that our healthcare system was going to be crushed unless we made major investments and expanded the healthcare system and our hospital networks. And nothing was done. Continually, whether it was the Liberals, the NDP, the Conservative, didn't matter who was in power. The talking points were always the same. We're driving efficiencies is the favorite term of politicians of every stripe. We're driving efficiencies. And that's just political speak for we're going to ask the healthcare system to do more with less. And so now we've hit this point in our history where the baby boom population are aged roughly 60 on the low end, up into 75, 76. They're in their 60s and 70s. This is when people have to, this is when people are more prone to getting sick, to flu, to COVID, to gastrointestinal, to all manner of diseases. And the way it works in Ontario, and you can check out the reporting on it, when they tell us that there are 1,600 or whatever the number is, patients in hospital with COVID, it's standard operating procedure now and has been for a while, for 2+ years. Anyone going into hospital for any reason whatsoever is automatically tested for COVID. If the test comes back positive, then they are counted as being a hospitalized COVID patient. Even if they went in there, someone gets into a car accident and has a broken leg or whatever, or someone going in for a knee replacement, everyone gets tested for COVID. And even if they're not being treated for COVID, they're still counted with those numbers. So we will see reporting in Ontario saying that perhaps 1,600 patients are now currently in hospital who have tested positive for COVID. But then now since January of this year, they've been breaking it out and saying, 55% of those individuals are not being treated for COVID, but merely tested positive after being admitted to hospital for another reason. But the simple fact of the matter is our hospitals are going to get slammed. And they can use that as an excuse. And the most heinous, the most horrible thing that could happen would be a reintroduction of the VaxPass system, which we've now found out. Everyone who's not sleeping under a rock somewhere knows that an executive from Pfizer was being questioned by members of the European Parliament and was asked if Pfizer had actually done tests, if they'd done part of their trials, was it geared toward proving or discovering whether the vaccines reduced or eliminated transmissibility of the virus. And this senior executive with Pfizer admitted that no, there were no studies done to determine whether or not the viruses or whether the vaccines had any impact on viral transmission or not. It just wasn't done. Her famous quote, and this one I love, she said, "We were moving at the speed of science." Well, simple fact of the matter is science moves incredibly slowly. It is a process, or if you're an American, a process, an incredibly slow process. When a pharmaceutical product, vaccine, whatever, is developed, up until the COVID vaccines, there had to be 3 separate trials at minimum, perhaps more. Phase 1, followed by a phase 2, followed by a phase 3. Standard operating procedure. With the COVID vaccines, I just saw misinformation being shared on Facebook by one of the official agencies trying to combat so-called vaccine hesitancy. And they contended that the COVID vaccines, like Pfizer's and Moderna's, that they went through complete phase 1, 2, and 3 testing. No, they did not. They had one trial, one single trial. And that trial was labeled as a phase 1, 2, and 3 concurrent. So they ran a single trial, one, and simply called it concurrent. They said, we're running phase 1, 2, and 3 concurrently, something that is never done. Phase 1 is the first trial. After preclinical lab work studying whatever is going to be proposed as an agent, be it a pharmaceutical product or a vaccine or whatever the case, after the preclinical work is done, then the company, Pfizer, Moderna, Novartis, GSK, whoever it is, they will design a phase 1 trial. Phase 1 is done for safety. And it's typically a very small trial, maybe a dozen, maybe 2 or 3 dozen individual subjects who are given the product. And what they are testing at that point, the primary focus, it's all about safety, and the word they'll use is tolerability. Is the agent tolerated? And and it can be just a few short weeks long, and they go in and they test they test individuals, the people in the trial, they test their biomarkers, liver enzymes, things of that nature, to determine whether or not the product is well tolerated. Is it safe? If phase 1 is successful and no one's dying and there are no serious health issues that result, then the company will pore over those results, and then they will design a phase 2 trial. And a phase 2 trial is larger. You go from a dozen or couple dozen patients in the phase 1 safety trial. Now you'll have a phase 2 trial, which will be larger in scope, might be 100 or 200 participants. And the trial protocol is then written up and is submitted to the FDA in the United States, or the European regulators in Europe. I forget their acronym. I think it's EUA. And then their varying committees will look at the trial protocol being put forward, and they may make suggestions. They may not. They may approve it straight up, or they may say, you know what, we think you should include a broader based patient population, more representative. And then once that phase 2 trial goes on, now they start to look at efficacy. Does the drug agent do what we believe it will do? And they'll look at things like dosing. You know, what is the proper level of dosing? Is it 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams, 15 milligrams? And they may have different arms of a study, a phase 2 study, one at 5, one at 10, one at 15, to see which it gets the best response. And after the end of phase 2, which typically will take months, maybe a year, At the end of that phase 2 trial, again, it's halted, it's stopped, the results are poured over. Usually it takes a month or two, and then the results of that study will be released to the general population. They might do it at a conference. If it's a cardiovascular drug, they'll wait for a big cardiovascular conference to release the results of their trial. And then again, the results of that trial will be used to help design a phase 3 trial. And again, the phase 3 trial design is submitted to the regulatory authorities like the FDA, their varying committees. This is a very slow, meticulous process. This is why it takes for a vaccine to get out and be approved and determined to be actually safe and effective. This is why it takes 10 plus years, typically. You cannot rush science. I can give you a couple of examples of disasters within one that's from 60, 70 years ago. Many will have heard of thalidomide. Thalidomide was a drug for nausea that was widely prescribed to pregnant women, but they never did testing on pregnant women. And after giving women thalidomide to combat their morning sickness, children started to being born with horrible malformed limbs. Children were being born instead of with proper hands, arms, legs, and feet, they were being born with flippers. But thalidomide stayed on the market for a full roughly 5 years. And the reason was because, science moves slow. We do not know that definitively that thalidomide is the cause. We can't determine cause and effect just because these malformed limbs and everything are happening with women taking thalidomide. It could be an environmental factor. There was no definitive causational link to the drug, and it took about 5 years. And then finally that causational link was determined and thalidomide was pulled. A lot of people say, well, that cannot happen in the modern era. That would never happen. That was in the 50s. That wouldn't happen in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. We wouldn't make that mistake again. Well, then I would invite you to look into a drug called Bextra, Bextra. I'll spell it: Bravo, Echo, X-ray, Tango, Romeo, Alpha, Bextra. And Bextra was a Pfizer drug. It was an anti-inflammatory, and it was on the market from the year 2000 until the year 2005. And then it was removed from the market because it caused cardiovascular heart inflammation and problem. It affected heart health. It led to deaths. It led to severe adverse events. And the regulatory authorities in the United States, the idea was punted of actually shutting Pfizer down, forcing them to close shop. Ultimately, part of the reason it is said that decision was not made, that they were allowed to continue operating, was because a lot of people have drug prescriptions that Pfizer provides that are absolutely essential to their health. And so that to shut Pfizer down would impact people, and they wouldn't be able to get the drugs that genuinely work and are needed. But Pfizer was fined in the billions of dollars. They were found guilty of withholding negative events, trial events, from regulators. And that should be a concern to anyone. If a company, they do a trial, it's got 50,000 people, that's at the start of the trial. How many at the end? If it all of a sudden goes down to 42,000 at the end of the trial, what happened to those other 8,000 people? It happens in trials where people will say, well, I'm tapping out, I'm done. I'm not partaking. I'm not going in to have my enzymes checked again and such. But it can also be that, that person had an adverse event. And we don't think it was caused by our drug, so we're removing them from the trial. So they were fined for not disclosing serious adverse events, fined for bribing doctors, for engaging in illegal and fraudulent marketing activity. You can look it up. It's on the National Institute of Health website. And just look up Pfizer repeat offender. And the masks to me are the least of the concern. The biggest concern is a rushed, at warp speed, not properly investigated pharmaceutical product, and the heinous discrimination. There's a new premier in Alberta named Daniel Smith, who has gone public and stated that, I'm paraphrasing, but she said something to the effect that during her lifetime, she's never seen discrimination like that, which was foisted upon those who refused to take the COVID shots. So it's the worst case of worst discrimination she has seen in her lifetime. She's 51 years of age. Now, she was taken to task over that, by LGBTQ and people of color and such. And she clarified her statement to say she's not suggesting that there isn't discrimination that takes place toward those who are, people of color, or people who are disabled, or people who are LGBTQ, though discrimination happens, sadly. However, if you were to fire someone from a job because they were Black or gay, or because of the religion they choose to follow, it's a crime. It's illegal to do that. To deny someone access to public transportation, to an airplane, to a train, because of their sexual orientation or something, that would be a crime. But in Canada and in other jurisdictions in the world, it wasn't a crime to discriminate against someone who refused to take the COVID shot. And name calling, juvenile grade school name calling, you're an anti-vaxxer. You're talking to people who, by and large, people who have declined the jab, have had polio, MMR, tetanus, and all of them. Somewhere around here, I have there it is. This is my little booklet with all the shots I've had. I find it hilarious to find myself being labeled an anti-vaxxer when I have had polio. I've had DTC, diphtheria, tetanus. Can't pronounce half of this. Pertussis, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, meningitis, and yet I'm labeled an anti-vaxxer because I declined one specific shot that was rushed into development at warp speed, and where normal scientific safety protocols were ignored. It's an emergency. We don't have time to look at long-term safety, so we're going to rush it through. It's a vaccine. It's a vaccine. Take it, because it's a vaccine, and all vaccines are safe. Tell that to Justin Bieber, who's had to cancel a world tour because he's got Bell's palsy. Tell it to the people who've developed Guillain-Barré syndrome, which causes paralysis. Tell it to the people who've died of heart attacks. It's a personal choice whether or not you're willing to take on the risks of any medical procedure. And all these shots I got when I was 40 plus. So It's ridiculous to call someone anti-vax when they've had every shot, but they're refusing just one specific one because, as the spokesman for Pfizer said to the European Parliament, well, we were moving at the speed of science, which meant they weren't moving at they were not moving at the speed of science. They were moving at the speed of politics, and they were rushing it through without taking the proper procedure of having separate phase 1, separate phase 2, separate phase 3 trials, and to ensure that, because you hear that vaccines are safe and effective. Well, when's the last time you heard of a person vaccinated against polio getting polio, or someone vaccinated against measles getting measles, or someone vaccinated against meningitis or whatever? The assumption has always been that when you get vaccinated, that you are immune. That's why we alternately refer to vaccinations as immunizations. If you go into Google, type in vaccine definition and look at the first definition that comes up, it will say an agent that produces immunity. Immunity means you do not get the disease you're vaccinated against. Vaccination and immunization are the same term. They're used interchangeably. And the COVID shots are the non-vaccinating vaccines, the non-immunizing immunizations. And the entire pretext for forcing them onto people was that it was our ticket out because they would provide robust immunity. I'm going to play. I have it queued up here. This was on there's a woman on MSNBC. Her name is Rachel Maddow, or I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce her last name, Rachel, and Maddow is Maddow. And she was on their show. She was on doing her little shtick. She's a commentator. And if you're ready, I'm going to play for you what she said. And this was a commonly held belief, because this is what she's describing is what everyone believed vaccines did until the COVID vaccines came along. Here she is, if you're ready.
It means that instead of the vaccine being able, instead of the virus being able to hop from person to person to person to person, spreading and sickening some of them, but not all of them. And the ones that it doesn't sicken don't know they have it. And then they give it to even more people because they didn't recognize they were, right? Instead of the virus being able to hop from person to person to person, potentially mutating and becoming more virulent and drug resistant along the way. Now we know that the vaccines work well enough that the virus stops with every vaccinated person. A vaccinated person gets exposed to the virus. The virus does not infect them. The virus cannot then use that person to go anywhere else. It cannot use a vaccinated person as a host to get more people. That means the vaccines will get us to the end of this if we just go fast enough to get the whole population.
That's the video that I don't know exactly what date that was. It was sometime in 2021, early 2021. The vaccines had first rolled out, and people were still under the illusion that they provided robust sterilizing immunity to infection, which we now know they don't. Everyone knows people who have been vaccinated who got COVID. And some will tell you they got seriously ill. There are people in hospital who've been double dosed and boosted and double boosted, and they're getting horribly sick. Said no, and I got the bug in February of 2022, just this past February, and no compunction in sharing the fact that it was a nothing burger. I have had worse flus. I was sick for about 2 days. By day 3, I was back on the mend. And I was at a local shopping plaza, and I ran into a gentleman with whom I used to go to church. I won't say his name chances of them seeing my video, no one watches my videos. If I get the odd one, blows up a bit, but for me, blowing up means 100, maybe 500 at the most. Most often my videos get a dozen or 2 dozen views. So this gentleman would see it are very minor, but he is in my social media circles, so it's possible. So I won't say his name, but he was telling me how, I got COVID, and thank God, thank goodness I've had the jabs and the boosters, because it knocked me on my ass for 2 weeks, for almost 2 weeks. Dog. Oh, thank goodness for those, for the vaccines. And then when I said, well, I'm not jabbed, and I got it in February, and I had I spiked a fever and I had chills. That was day one. By day two, that was Friday. By Saturday, I was feeling, after effects. There was an event that I had wanted to attend, and I thought maybe I'll just sit in the car, but didn't. I finally said, no, I'm going back to bed. I had a headache, scratchy throat, cough, aches and pains, sore muscles and joints. And that was day two, Saturday. By Sunday, I was feeling better. By Monday, I was 100%. It was a big nothing burger. Now I never got tested. I never swabbed, and I never rapid tested to confirm that it was in fact COVID. However, a couple weeks after that, I developed conjunctivitis, which pink eye, and it went from my one eye to the other eye. I think it started in my left and went to the right, and then it went back from the right and then went back into the left, or vice versa. I don't remember where it started and ended, but it went from one, then to the other, then back to the one it started in, and I haven't had it since. And there was reporting coming out that saying people who've had COVID, that conjunctivitis, pink eye, is common afterwards. So that made me pretty darn certain that what I had was COVID. And whoop-de-doo. I've had flus, I've had colds, and now I've had COVID, February. And I'm not like I have a member of my extended family, 38 years of age, suffered a heart attack. 6 foot tall, 180 pounds, super fit and healthy, heart attack. And sadly, I know of 4 other instances, and one of them, an individual died. And that's just too much for me to dismiss it as just being coincidental. So that's my little video. If you liked it, thank you to the 2 thumbs up. If you watch it later and you want to, by all means. And of course, you're welcome to subscribe. And then when I do a video, you'll know. So now it's Sunday. Happy Sunday, everyone. And Sunday at 12:28 a.m. And we are now the 16th of October. The cold weather's coming. People are going to start getting sick. There are a lot of individuals, and I fall into this camp, who speculate that the potentially have weakened people's immune systems, leaving them more susceptible to COVID, flu, whatever is floating around. So I'll leave you with something I learned from a gentleman by the name of Dr. David Katz, who's a past president of the U.S. Centers for Lifestyle Medicine. He's Yale educated, and I believe he had his own practice centered around what is determined as lifestyle medicine. He's a medical doctor. He's not a homeopath. He's an actual MD, Dr. David Katz, Katz or Katz. And he said there are 5 key factors that determine a person's health overall, broadly speaking. And one, unfortunately, you can't do anything about it. It's a lottery. It's your genetics, so you can't control that. But the remaining four you can control to varying degrees. Number one, get enough sleep. Number two, manage your stress. Don't stress out. Number three, diet. And number four is exercise. So if you do those four things, you can't help your genetics, but the other four, you do have some control over. So there were no comments or anything. I always, if you're watching one that I do later and you want to type in a comment, please do, because I enjoy the engagement. But again, thanks for the likes. If you want to subscribe. And wish you a good week, and we'll see what the days, weeks, what's coming in the coming months. I don't think this is over. Good night.